Our story begins with someone panicking as they enter the church, shouting that he's there and telling a man that the place isn't safe anymore. He urges the man to escape. The man asks the panicking person who he's talking about. The person questions if the man hasn't heard the rumors circulating in Humite Street. He explains that they're talking about the Lycan Slaughterer, Vampire Slayer, and the Master of Blue Devils, who's heading there with his undead. He also mentions that this person won't let the Dark Order escape and intends to kill them in the cruelest way possible. The man questions why they should worry when they have the best Holy Knight Order with them. The person shakily tells him that the knights he's talking about have been turned into undead and are on their way. Meanwhile, our protagonist orders his undead knights to move, and they immediately head towards the church. The two men, who are conversing, are stunned to see the undead knights. Suddenly, the church's glass shatters, and the undead knights rush inside to attack them. The undead knights overpower one of the men and mercilessly slaughter the other, who pleads for mercy. The surviving man looks at our protagonist, wondering how this is possible when the undead monsters are supposed to serve them, the Necromancers. Our protagonist steps on the man's hand, and the man says that no matter how hard he tries to stop them, God will save them, granting them salvation. Our protagonist just points his gun at the man's head and informs him that he'll do it for him instead. The man feels divine power seeping into his skin and warns our protagonist that the blessing of God will lead him to hell. Then, our protagonist fires a bullet from his gun. Before this, people in the kingdom had been whispering about how our protagonist had brought shame to the Holy Emperor's kingdom. They wondered how someone like him could be born in a kingdom ruled by the Holy Emperor. Many considered him the lowest of humankind with no morals. Someone else asks if they know what happened with the Archbishop and proceeds to tell everyone about the incident where our protagonist harassed the Archbishop's daughter, getting himself into trouble. They think it would have been better if he had just accepted the punishment. But instead, he trashed the Archbishop's room, driving the Holy Emperor to send him to the land of the dead spirits. The Emperor sent him there for reflection, but he engaged in questionable activities and even attempted suicide after being rejected by a girl. Fortunately, he survived, and the strange thing is he became a completely different person. He started working diligently at the monastery without causing any trouble. Everyone in town was intrigued by the sudden transformation, but others were suspicious because of this abrupt change. Later, a demon possessed his body due to blasphemy, and he made a contract with the demon. People in the monastery began to witness a walking corpse, leading to various rumors. Our protagonist then asked them what they thought about it. Meanwhile, an undead man looked at him, and he gazed back at it. Our protagonist's name is Alan Alphals, and he is 16 years old. He was once the exiled 7th prince, and his class is that of a necromancer. He wonders why the system keeps appearing randomly and mentions to the undead that he thinks there are rumors because some people have seen them walking. He's frustrated, knowing that if this continues and he's wrongly accused of heresy, he doesn't know what to do. He realizes that he is not truly Alan Alphals but an average person in the Republic of Korea. However, he randomly inhabits the body of the Holy Emperor's unpopular grandson when his life is at risk, like when he's hanging by a rope. He points to the status window on the undead men, explaining that he can see a status window, and he possesses necromancer abilities. He uses these abilities to help himself as a graveyard keeper, but it's considered heresy in that world. At first, he was confused, but he began to understand how to use his abilities. However, he still wondered if he should continue. He tells the zombies that they work well together by digging graves, burying the deceased, and placing gravestones on the finished tombs. This touches the zombies, but they are shocked when he suggests that it might be time to bid farewell. The zombies react with shock, pain, and anger upon hearing this, but he urges them to calm down and reminds the angry one to watch his language. He explains that he had a complicated first life but is trying to live his second life more peacefully. He expresses that he'll think more about it since he's grown close to them and asks if they are okay with that, to which they raise their thumbs in agreement. He instructs them to start working. A moment later, two men appear in the graveyard. One of them asks his companion if he heard something, but his companion tells him to be quiet and keep moving if he doesn't want to end up like those undead. He adds that they should hurry and go to the prince to ask for help with that cursed village. The man asks his companion if those are the last of the corpses, and his companion replies affirmatively, stating that it seems like those are the only ones left. The man observes that everyone has fled, leaving the place filled with corpses. He apologetically asks Alan if he can also come to the village, which leaves Alan confused. Alan asks why, and the man explains that the entire village has nearly been wiped out, and he believes they would be safe with Alan. The other man adds that they believe they're safe because they've been frequently around Alan while moving corpses, but he knows he doesn't possess such power. Nevertheless, the two men hug Alan, begging him to let them stay by his side, as they believe they would be safe with him. Alan thinks there must be a misunderstanding and wonders what they expect him to do. A few minutes later, they arrive at the village, and Alan notices that it's quite frightening. One of the men, who is nervously clinging to him, warns him that the waterworks have stopped, resulting in many deep water pools, and advises him to be careful. Alan, annoyed, tells them to get off of him. The man insists that they should always carry charms on their bodies, causing Alan to angrily ask if they consider him a charm. As they proceed to walk, Alan advises them that if he were in their shoes, he'd use his time to search in another house. However, he suddenly spots something and asks what it is. The men respond by asking what he's seeing and tell him not to try to scare them. Alan walks toward the direction of the mysterious sight and informs them that he's going to check it out. The men, in a panic, urge him not to go and not to wander off alone. But he continues walking, despite his unease, certain that something is amiss. He senses a simple presence, but one that exudes a murderous aura. Suddenly, he hears something behind him, causing him to jump in shock. When he looks back, he sees only a rat, and he's annoyed that it was just a rat. However, the rat's eyes turn red, and a swarm of rats emerges from a hole, immediately leaping toward him to bite him. Panicked, he shouts that they are zombie rats as the rodents crawl onto his body. He swings his shovel to repel the rats and realizes that this is the reason the village has met its tragic fate. He continues to swing his shovel, striking the ground forcefully, and yells at them to go away. Due to his attacks, a few rats die, and his mask flies off, leaving him confused by his own actions. The rats were furious to see their young ones die, and they immediately pounced on him to attack. Panicked, he told them he didn't do it intentionally and didn't mean any harm. However, the rats pinned him to the ground. His shovel ended up deep in the water behind him while he was busy shouting at the rats to stop attacking him. His shovel lit up underwater, and when he touched the water, the system popped up, showing that he was using the skill of the Swamp of Death. The water attacked the rats who were attacking him. He was confused about what had just happened when the two men found him and asked him in shock why there were so many rats. They then noticed that the dirty water puddle had transformed into holy water and excitedly asked him how he did it, wondering if he had purified the rats. He simply grabbed his shovel, thinking that he was no prince because he had just discovered that he could use skills other than raising zombies and even necromancer skills. However, he was puzzled about why it had purified the water. He knew that his body was full of holy power because he belonged to the grandson of the Holy Emperor, which may have made his skill holy and the reason why the zombies were relatively kind. Then he heard the men saying they thought they had all died, but there was a child, and they noticed the girl in front of them was Charlotte, who had lived next door. The man called for Charlotte to come to them and asked her where her parents were, not noticing that she was holding a knife. Suddenly, she swiftly jumped towards the two men, attacking them. Alan blocked the knife with his shovel just in time and wondered if she was a zombie girl. He swung his shovel, making her jump back, and noticed that the fact she was using tools meant she wasn't completely a zombie yet. She cried and called for her mother and father to ask where they were, leaving him stunned. He disappointingly smiled and blocked her attack once again. His shovel released a holy power while he struggled to block her, and smoke came out of her, making him realize that coming into contact with holy power burns their bodies. He knew it would hurt her if he continued attacking, so he forcefully pressed her down into the holy water, causing her to scream in pain. He shouted for her to endure it a little and that he couldn't think of any other way. She tried to escape while crying out in pain, but he held her down firmly. A minute later, he released her a little, and she lay in the puddle without trying to escape anymore. Later, people approached him, telling him they heard he had also saved a child named Charlotte, and begged him to help them too. He told them he hadn't saved anyone, leaving them confused, and they asked what he meant. He closed the book he was reading and calmly informed them that Charlotte had died. The man couldn't believe him and asked if Charlotte had really died. Alan responded by asking how he was supposed to save people, explaining that his blood was related to the Holy Emperors, but he didn't possess any special abilities. This left the people in a panic, asking each other what they could do to save their village. They explained that they had come all the way there, hoping he could save them. Alan sighed and looked at them, questioning where they had even heard about him saving other people. Just as the man was about to answer, someone excitedly called him Prince and informed him that Charlotte had awakened. The man also credited him for her condition, mentioning that he had put her back to sleep because she seemed tired. The man then noticed the people staring at Alan and commented that it appeared he had many guests. With frustration, Alan reluctantly agreed, stating that he had to help them because he possessed more divine power than they did. He also playfully scolded the man named Grill for talking too much and clarified that there were a few conditions when he helped them. The system showed him that the old man in front of the people was Parlock, 75 years old, with specialties in tattle, farming, and tricks. Parlock, however, seemed full of suspicion, which intrigued Alan as he pondered the reasons for Parlock's lack of trust. He wondered if it was because he was considered a worthless prince. Then he told Parlock that his conditions were simple, emphasizing that he didn't want to do volunteer work for free, so they should provide him with money and supplies. He also requested that they fix the cathedral for free, which prompted Parlock to ask if he meant the entire cathedral. Alan turned around and explained that it was necessary for their survival, but if they didn't want to do it, that was fine. Parlock shouted that they would do it, but Alan added that there was one more important thing. This left the people stunned and unable to believe there was more to the agreement. Alan told them that they should ensure they kept their trade away from the Holy Knights, as he knew he'd get into trouble if the Holy Royal family found out. Parlock agreed with the others, and the people turned around, still uncertain if it might be a scam. Alan, on the other hand, excitedly thought that the cathedral, once meant for exiling, would finally be useful. He remembered Parlock had mentioned that 30 corpses in the village had turned into zombies, which he believed was manageable. Alan then instructed everyone to grab their gear, which confused them. He reminded them that they had asked for help with the zombies and asked if they were planning to make him fight all alone. With a smile, he suggested that they could swing some objects while he performed his holy prayers. This left the people stunned, and someone even called him a demon. As they were about to discuss this further, they heard a growling sound from outside, and one of the people shouted that a zombie had followed them. Alan urged them to quickly retrieve their gear from storage and use anything, even a mop, to defend themselves if needed. He looked outside and saw a swarm of zombies heading toward them, which led him to ask Parlock how those zombies, originally just 30 corpses, had multiplied. He angrily called Parlock chief, but Parlock explained that he couldn't see well and ran away, which made him even more furious. He asked Parlock if he was kidding. The people swung their weapons to attack the zombies, and he used his shovel to strike one of them. He also employed his Swamp of Death skill to cut down the zombies with holy water. Using the skill wasn't difficult for him because he had been a necromancer before coming to this world and had volunteered in a virtual reality game's beta testing to earn some money. He had chosen the necromancer class in that game but believed he had died from electrocution. He lost consciousness after smelling his burnt skin, and when he woke up, he found himself in Alan's body. Fortunately, the skills from the game had transferred, and the divine power in his body had modified his skills. It was challenging for him to control his divine power, so every time he used a skill, his divine power spilled out, leaving him wondering if it could be fixed. Suddenly, he heard someone shout that he couldn't continue, and a man who was in tears and trembling with fear cried that he couldn't go on, even though he knew they were facing zombies. He saw his wife among them. The man looked at his wife and asked how he could kill that woman. A tear slipped down the man's cheek and was about to fall on his wife's hand when she suddenly launched an attack, shouting. Fortunately, Alan kicked the woman's face just in time, causing her to crash to the ground. The man called out to his wife in concern, but Alan reminded him that his wife was already dead, so he should stop overreacting. Still, the man shakily told him that he didn't know what to do. Alan shouted at the man to look at his wife while pointing his shovel at the woman zombie, reminding the man that his wife's body was rotting, and her soul had lost its way. He explained that if the man wanted his wife to suffer like this, he should run away, but if he didn't want that, he should stop crying and fight. While he was speaking, 3 zombies launched an attack on him. Fortunately, he managed to avoid one of the zombie attacks but was shocked to see someone falling from the sky out of nowhere. The person landed powerfully, breaking the ground with just a fist. A piece of the ground hit one of the zombies, and the person stood up as the zombies closed in on Alan, who was trembling with fear. Then, Charlotte asked him if he was okay. Autumn and winter were a period plagued by illness, and Charlotte believed it was all happening so they could stay healthy in the coming year. She also held on to her mother's words. Breathlessly, she called out for her mother and father. She opened their door and shouted that there were a bunch of rats outside with red eyes. To her shock, she found her father biting her mother. Her mother tearfully told her to run, but she hesitantly stepped inside, calling for her mother. However, her mother began to growl like a zombie, and she cried out in horror when she saw both her parents turn into zombies. She couldn't recall much after that. The rats outside and her zombified parents chased after her. She grabbed whatever she could find and swung at them, ultimately killing her own mother and father to protect herself. She noticed that the people in her village had turned strange, and the rats that had tried to attack her earlier were now ignoring her. This made her wonder if she was turning into one of them, but she no longer cared. She knew there was no one to save her, but she still held on to the hope that perhaps, just maybe, one person could rescue her. Then she remembered being forced into the water with a man, and she recalled the man telling her that he couldn't think of any other way. She saw herself being forcefully submerged in the water, which made her open her eyes in a state of panic and shock. She caught her breath and wondered about the person in that memory and what it meant. But then someone excitedly told her that she was awake. She sat down and asked where she was. A woman replied that the prince had instructed her to look after Charlotte, and there were zombies outside, so they should remain quiet. This left Charlotte confused. She then heard a man shouting for someone to stop crying and to fight, followed by calling the man Prince and warning him about zombies approaching. She remembered swearing that if someone saved her. Suddenly, a powerful light radiated from her. She opened the window of the room, stepped on the windowsill, and jumped out. She flew to where Alan was, powerfully striking the ground and throwing a zombie away, leaving the others in awe. She asked Alan if he was okay and mentioned that she'd saved the person who saved her. A minute later, Alan couldn't believe what he was seeing as he looked at a pile of zombies in front of him. He wondered how Charlotte had managed to do it all by herself. He saw her being praised by the people, which made him angry because they seemed to worship her more, even though he had been the one holding the zombies off. He guessed that cleansing Charlotte right before she turned into a zombie had done something to her, and he was frustrated because he didn't even know what his abilities were capable of. He instructed the people to stop and take care of their family's remains. He acknowledged that they were all tired, but emphasized that it was better to get it over with. He understood that they were in pain and needed to free their loved ones from it. He assured them that he would also help with the cleansing ritual. The ritual was simple. They should have a funeral for the deceased and wish for them to rest in peace, so their spirits wouldn't wander and could find rest. He knew that part of the reason he was exiled to the land of the dead spirits was that it had a high chance of zombies naturally rising, and they needed someone to take care of the deceased. However, considering all of this, he found the situation unusual. He had never seen records of so many villages getting damaged so quickly all at once, and it was too early for the wave of death to come. He called Parlock to inquire about the situation in the village and whether there were any strange or unusual occurrences. Parlock replied that there hadn't been anything out of the ordinary, and the plague had started about a month ago. He mentioned his theory that it might be intentional, but before he could discuss the possibility of a necromancer, Parlock shouted in shock, and people nearby overheard, asking if he meant a reaper who spreads the plague or a demon who seals the spirits. He reassured Parlock that he was just talking to himself, causing Parlock to express his disgust at the mere thought of such a person being nearby. In his mind, he apologized to Parlock for disturbing him, and he decided to ignore his theory. He informed the people that he was going to rest and that they should take care of the rest. The people replied with an okay. He returned to the cathedral, pondering what they meant by calling him the prince when he was just a laborer. He entered his room and lay down on his bed, feeling exhausted after the funeral. As he closed his eyes, he told himself they should rest for a while. The next day, he was abruptly awakened by a scream. He rushed out of his room, questioning what was happening so early in the morning. He was shocked to hear someone shout that the zombies had kidnapped a person. He asked the man what he meant by the zombies kidnapped people, and the man replied that they had witnessed it with their own eyes. The zombies took advantage of the opportunity when they were all exhausted from working throughout the night. The man went on to explain that as they were walking, they heard someone scream, and a woman named Morian begged them to save her. Curious, he inquired about who Morian was, and the man replied that she was a young lady who gathered herbs. She had a reputation for assisting the villagers and helping treat injured individuals. However, he interrupted the man to ask if he knew her, to which the man nervously replied that she was a beauty and had once rejected the prince's confession. He quickly realized his mistake and wondered if it was a setup. The man reminded him that he had been so humiliated by the rejection that he had attempted to hang himself. He blushed and asked the man to stop because it was embarrassing. The man changed the topic by suggesting that they should form a search party and look for Morian. He wondered if they were being more proactive because Morian was a beauty, but he acknowledged the need to investigate, as it was his first time witnessing zombies kidnap a human. He needed to confirm if something unusual was happening. He put on his robe and inquired if tracking was possible. The man suggested that a hunter from their village named Hans might be of assistance. He agreed and instructed the man to inform Hans to come quickly. He then noticed Charlotte staring at him and engaged in a silent staring contest with her. He ended up losing and wondered if she held a grudge against him for knocking her down. He hurriedly walked away, urging the men to move quickly, emphasizing that any delay might result in Morian becoming the zombie's prey, to which the men readily agreed. This left Charlotte alone, speechless. A few minutes later, Hans informed him that zombies left traces as they walked by dragging their feet, making them easy to track. They were sure the zombies had gone inside a cave. He commended Hans for his excellent tracking skills but also noted that the cave exuded a foreboding demonic energy. While he might believe it was a location with a natural accumulation of demonic energy, judging by the zombies' actions, there was a high likelihood that someone was behind them. He suggested burning down the cave, leaving the others dumbfounded. He reminded them that Morian was still inside. Although he remembered her, he argued that the entire cave was a very gloomy and ominous location where the undead's powers were significantly enhanced. If everyone rushed inside to save a single woman, they might all become easy prey. Hans asked him how they could save Morian, and he replied that they should prepare properly and come back. However, the likelihood of Morian still being alive would decrease. Suddenly, he heard a growl behind him and turned in confusion to see a huge bear close by. The bear bit him, causing him to shout in pain, and the people with him rushed to help. The bear pulled him inside the cave, and he saw the others trying to run quickly to his rescue. Unfortunately, the bear threw him down, and he realized that the bear was also a zombie. Nonetheless, he managed to swing his shovel using his other hand and used his Swamp of Death skill to attack the zombie bear. He fell to the ground, holding his injured shoulder in pain, and used his terrible curse skill to heal himself. As expected, it started to heal, but he knew that his divine power was running low. In times like these, it was more convenient to have the skills reversed. When he finished healing himself, he heard the bear approach from behind, and the system displayed that it was a king of gluttony with an unknown age and specialties in biting, crushing, slashing, and digging into organs. It was also noted as enhanced by necromancy. Seeing this, he realized that the bear was standing strong even after being hit with his holy water, and he understood that it would be troublesome if the bear was being controlled by a necromancer. He sweated and pondered how he could win against a bear with brute force. The bear jumped towards him to bite him again, but he managed to avoid it. However, the bear swiftly launched its claws to slash him. In the nick of time, Charlotte appeared and stabbed the bear's eye. She looked at him with concern, checking if he was alright. The bear lifted its head in anger, causing her to stumble slightly. Meanwhile, Alan wondered if Charlotte had followed along but quickly realized it wasn't important at that moment. He shouted to her to keep the bear occupied, which left her puzzled. She was slammed hard onto the ground, and the bear attempted to crush him with its paw. Thankfully, she managed to evade the attack. The bear opened its mouth wide to bite her, and she immediately stabbed the bear's mouth with her knife. However, the bear continued to try and bite her hands off, leading to a fierce struggle. Suddenly, a holy power struck the bear, causing it to slam into the wall and release Charlotte. Alan extended his hand to her and commended her for buying him the time he needed to use his skills. She replied that she should be thanking him. Then, he noticed something was wrong with his hand, and she realized it wasn't Alan's hand. She wondered if he had turned into a zombie in such a short time but realized that it was unlikely. Alan told her that this was the way they should fight the battle, while he smiled at the zombies emerging from underground, thinking that the bear had no chance against their numbers. Then the zombies began to bite the bear's body, making it scream in pain. It launched at the zombies, and the two of them hit with the bear claws, and were thrown away and slammed into the wall hard. But then the zombies' hands came out from underground and grabbed the bear to make it stay still. He was panting in exhaustion, thinking that the bear had killed many people, and he was able to summon many zombies. It noticed that the bear's durability was definitely much higher than its zombies, but in the end, the bear was severely injured. It growled and looked at him, but blood spread everywhere, and the strong, huge bear slowly fell to the ground with a knife in its head. He was surprised to see that Charlotte did it. He knew that the fight's result was pretty obvious, but then he felt pain in his head, making Charlotte, who was trying to pull her knife out of the bear's head, worried. She asked him if he was alright and told him to let her help him. He replied that he was okay and that he had just used too much divine power. He wondered why Charlotte was there and if she had come there to harm him. Then he told her that he happened to show her all his power and he wished to live quietly as an exile, so it would be nice if she could keep his power a secret. In Charlotte's eyes, Alan was asking her sweetly, but the real Alan was exhausted and swearing to her in his mind that he wouldn't bother her anymore, so she should leave him alone. She told him that he was her lifesaver, so she would listen to any of his wishes, making him confused. He asked her how he was her lifesaver and why he thought he was her lifesaver. But before Charlotte could answer, someone called them from above, and Hans worriedly asked Charlotte why she had jumped in there and asked Alan if he was okay. Then he told them that they had brought the gear to explore the cave. Hans proceeded to get down using his rope while telling them in his mind that he was okay, so they should just go back up because they wouldn't be helpful. Hans was shocked and asked them who had done it to those zombies and the bear. He also asked if they had done it, knowing that the bear was known as the king of gluttony, and they didn't even know how many people the bear had harmed till now. Charlotte, sweating, tried to reason, but then he told Hans that he thought there was a necromancer in that cave. The necromancer tried to turn that cave into his base and killed the bear that was already there. Also, they were all dead when they got there. The people laughingly told each other that it made sense and that the necromancer was scary. He realized that they were simple-minded, but he didn't care anymore, and he thought the woman called Morian was probably dead. He thinks the necromancer tried to bait them with her to kill more people using the bear. Hans asked him what they should do now, and he told him that they should go further. Hans asked him if he was sure, and he replied yes because he needed to see how great a necromancer that person is. He told them that everything seemed okay, so they should go. A moment later, they walked inside the cave and peeked to look to the end of the cave. Hans whispered to him to look ahead because Morian was there. Then the people rushed toward Morian, telling her that they were there to save her, but he just silently walked because he couldn't believe that Morian was alive. Knowing that the necromancer had used her as bait, it should have been easier to just kill her and take control. but then he guessed that maybe Morian was. Suddenly, Morian called him Prince and sweetly asked everyone if they had come there to save her, but he just hit her head using his shovel. She coughed blood and fell, making Hans, Grill, and Charlotte shocked. The people asked him why he did it, but he just told Morian that he should have hit her with the sharper side, and it was his bad for not doing it. Grill worriedly asked Morian if she was okay, and Hans confusedly asked him what was wrong. But he just asked Hans back what was wrong and told him that he could see it all. The system showed him that Morian's true name is Morgana. She is 63 years old. Her specialties are a honey trap, necromancy, dissection, curse, and assassination, and she is currently extremely nervous and agitated. He realized that Morian wasn't the bait, and Morian shakily told him that there must be a misunderstanding. But he told her that he was not listening to her anymore and told everyone not to get tricked by her because she was the Necromancer. This shocked everyone there. He told them that her name, her age, everything was a lie, but she still shouted and told everyone that the Necromancer had dragged her there and tortured her. He teasingly replied, sure, and asked her if she thought people would believe her since she had acted so kind while getting something from behind his robe. Then he showed a bottle of holy water and told her to drink it because if she was a necromancer, his organs would melt down. But it was the best medicine for humans, so her wounds should heal instantly. She told him that he didn't have to give her such a precious thing. And he replied that it was precious, so she better drink it. She wondered how he noticed it when she knew her disguise was perfect. And no one suspected anything while she acted as Morian in the village for a whole year. She was wondering how that darn prince figured it out and what kind of power he possessed that allowed him to get rid of the bear. Then he teasingly asked her if she wasn't going to drink it and told her that the prince was giving it to her, so she should receive it with both hands. She seriously told him that she was going to get rid of him during the wave of death. Suddenly, she attacked the holy water bottle in his hand, making it shatter everywhere. Then a skeleton undead came out from underground while she was telling him that he had only hastened his death. She tried to keep him alive for longer, but he was going to die there. He just slammed his shovel on the skeleton's head and swiftly attacked all of the skeletons. He asked them how dare they act arrogantly in front of him and told the undead to go back when he was still being nice. She was looking at Alan in fear without noticing someone behind her. Then Charlotte pinned her down on the ground, and she was shocked to see Alan patting the skeleton's head while praising Charlotte for a good job. She asked him what the heck he was, how he did it to her skeletons, and if the shovel he was holding was the source of his strength. He replied that she was right, and the shovels were great in those days. She shouted that it couldn't just be a normal shovel because it had to be a holy relic. But he interrupted her words when he asked her if she was seriously nitpicking about it instead of worrying about herself, while Charlotte was pointing to the sharp knife on her neck. Later, she was beaten up while introducing herself as Morgana, a 63-year-old necromancer. He asked her if she was not going to confess everything, making her angry, and she shatteredly told him that she'll tell him who told her to kill him, so he shouldn't kill her. He asked her if she was saying that someone told her to do it, and she replied that she was asked to seduce him and fake his death as a suicide. This surprised him, and he realized that Alan didn't commit suicide, but was forced to do it. So he thinks Alan wasn't that pathetic, which is surprising for him, while Morgana wondered why he was so indifferent about it. She whispered to him that the Dark Church told her to kill the Holy Emperor's 7th grandson, and she saw through the bear that he was also a necromancer. So if the church finds out about it, they won't leave him alone for much longer. He told her that it meant she really saw him and told Charlotte that he guessed they must kill her, to which Charlotte agreed. She panickingly shouted that it was a slip of the tongue and she would keep it a secret. Also, she would tell him everything about the Dark Church, but he slapped her hard on the face while telling her that if she was going to tell him everything that easily, then it didn't worth a thing, and the villagers would decide her fate. He also told her that there were many people there who had lost their family members to her, so she should pay for her sins. She shatteringly told him to hold on and begged him to spare her, but he just asked Hans how they were going to handle her. Hans replied that she should receive the same punishment as the crime she committed, and they would give her a painful death and then leave her in the forest. Then the animals would eat her corpse, and what was left of her would become a zombie. Hans asked him if it wasn't a fitting end for a necromancer who insulted the dead, and he replied yes, expecting it from the Middle Ages. He silently thought for a moment about the Dark Church. A moment later, he got a swarm of books and remembered that he couldn't figure out everything. But he managed to successfully steal the books of that necromancer and stored them in inventory. He thought as a necromancer, it'd be great if he could talk to spirits, but he guessed he couldn't get that skill there. Then he opened the book to start reading it, and he thought that Morgana said something about the wave of death or something like it, so he knew he needed to read about the wave of death again and the assassination. This made him wonder if his siblings were behind it, but he thought, at any rate, since he was the prince, they might have been trying to get rid of him because of the battle of succession. He closed the book he was reading, knowing that it was a power struggle, and he wondered how complicated the life of the royal family was. He pondered what if he was really murdered, and if he should hire some mercenaries, but he decided that for now, he had to raise his skill proficiency quickly without noticing Charlotte behind him. Charlotte heard him and wondered if he would be murdered. Then she remembered that everyone said Alan had changed, and he was similar in size to him, but he always took the initiative in fighting. She also heard that Alan saved many people in that incident alone, and he even held the funerals for those who passed away. Then she remembered Grill telling her that while she was lying there, Alan also took care of her parents' corpses, making her shed tears. She clenched her hands and thought that Alan was both her parents and her savior, so she wanted to thank him, but she thought it was not enough. There was danger lurking around Alan, so he needed a shield to protect him, which meant that in order to protect the great prince, she had to become even stronger. The undead evolve over time. When the bodies of zombies decay, they become skeletons. But if they manage to maintain their bodies intact, they'll evolve into their more powerful versions called ghouls. From a ghoul, they evolve into a Dullahan, and from a Dullahan to a vampire. The more they evolve, the more intelligent and powerful they become. When zombies are in the dark, the mana contained in the darkness makes them evolve more quickly, which is why these creatures always desire stronger mana. The destination of all zombies is called the Land of the Dead Spirits. To prevent their flesh from decaying due to warm weather, the zombies head to lands that are darker and colder. When autumn ends and winter arrives, the period of extreme cold, when their instincts to find the Land of the Dead Spirits peak, is called the Wave of Death. On December 25th, the coldest day during the period of the Wave of Death, and the day when the Land of the Dead's king named Ammon died, is the day when the largest number of undead seek out the Land of the Dead Spirits to reclaim their lives. He knows that there is about 1 month left until the Wave of Death and figures out that Morgana is planning to use those zombies to kill him. Then someone called him, and Charlotte told him that she would help him put it up if he gave it to her, so he gave the book to her, and she walked away, leaving him thinking that he didn't even ask her to, but she still comes to the church every day. In addition to organizing books, Charlotte even does cleaning, organizes cemeteries, and prepares meals without pay, making him wonder if it was okay for him to accept such help. But he guessed Charlotte would probably leave when she was satisfied. He remembered that from what he heard, it looks like Grill accepted Charlotte as his adopted daughter, so she now has a home to return to. He knows that even though Grill looks sloppy, he was a nice guy. Suddenly, he heard a thud sound, and the knights walked inside the cathedral where he was. One of the knights glared at him, making him jump out of the window in shock. The knight, named Harmon Diane, 33 years old, and a vice commander of the Knights of the Holy Cross, also a practitioner of Heim's protection, told him that he had heard he caught the witch Morgana. He was annoyed, thinking that Harmon got to the point without even greeting him, and he was treating him like an exiled prince through and through. Also, considering how Harmon had already heard the news, he guessed those must be the individuals who were keeping an eye on him. Then he told Harmon that he was right that he caught Morgana together with the villagers and asked him if he had a problem with it. Harmon replied that they were only there to confirm the facts, but it seemed to be true, and that he fought hard together with the villagers, to which he agreed. But when Harmon told him that he had killed the king of predators with farming tools, he was confused. He became even more bewildered when Harmon told him that while he was fighting the king of bears, a person named Grill killed 30 zombies and cornered the witch with holy water. The farmer had told him this himself, making him think that it hadn't been 5 minutes since he complimented Grill for being one of the good guys. Harmon told him that honestly, he thought it was an exaggeration. But after seeing the traces of a fierce battle, he guessed everything Grill said was true. However, he thought on his own that if Harmon was a holy knight, he shouldn't be so gullible. Harmon asked him if he knew that Morgana belonged to the Dark Church, and he replied yes because he had heard it from Morgana. She was saying it like it was some kind of secret, but it was a public fact. Harmon agreed with him and explained that the Dark Church was a vicious organization, and so far, Morgana had been able to devastate 5 villages all by herself. He told Harmon that he was just fooling around without knowing it, making Harmon ask him if he really eliminated that witch completely. He tells Harmon if he didn't hear that she has been beaten to death and her body was thrown away. Harmon asks if he is the one who did it, but he asked Harmon back what kind of strength he even had and how it could possibly be him. He knew it was true that he had subdued Morgana, but there was no good in revealing his power. It was also true that the villagers had helped, so he decided to go along with Grill's bluffing. He told Harmon that just being there got him so scared that he almost wet his pants. This made Harmon and the knights look at him in disgust. but he knew that even the thought of it disgusted him too. Harmond asked him if it meant he did not know about the witch's magic books. He asked Harmond what he meant by books. Harmond replied that they were supposed to retrieve books on dark magic, but for some reason, the witch's bookshelf was empty, making him go silent, knowing that he was the one who had kept them in his inventory. He told Harmond that the villagers might have burned them because of how ominous those books were, and he could ask them again. To this, Harmond replied that he would and thanked him. But before Harmond left, he handed him a bag and told him that the bounty on Morgana was 80 gold. Harmond also told him that Morgana had quite the bounty on her head. He grabbed the bag of gold, saying that he only did what he had to do. Harmond told him that he must distribute it among the villagers too. He creepily smiled, replying that he would, while thinking he was blessed. Then he turned around, kissing the bag of gold, which made Harmond sigh. Harmond told him that since he was done with his work, he should excuse him. But then Harmond told him to pack his luggage, which surprised him, and he asked why when he had already been exiled. Harmond told him that it was almost time for the wave of death, so they would escort him out of there. He wondered if they still cared about him, given that he was a prince. He asked Harmond if he was being sent back to the Imperial Palace or the warm south if they were evacuating. Harmond replied no and told him that he would come with them to the Lonia estate, which left him confused. He told Harmond that the Lonia estate was only half a day away, and he asked if there was any point in evacuating to that place when they would still be in the land of the dead. Harmond replied that there was a point in doing it and explained to him that the Lonia estate was a fortress built to stop the wave of death. In order to fight the zombies in the wave of death, they had gathered soldiers and prisoners. He was about to tell Harmond what he thought he meant, and Harmond agreed that there would be many victims, so he should hold the funerals at the Lonia estate. Later, Gennard Lapping, a 43-year-old man, a viscount, and the Lonia feudal lord, with traits of being comforting, communicative, and merciful, asked him how he was feeling. He replied that he was not feeling well, prompting Gennard to inquire if his journey there had been rough. He responded with a yes because the carriage wasn't comfortable to ride. Gennard then asked Grill and Charlotte who they were. Grill replied that he was someone important, and Charlotte said she was a servant. He noticed that they were treating them quite nicely for an exiled prince. He told Gennard to stop chatting and guided him to the room. Gennard replied, okay, leaving him wondering why he had to come to the land of the dead spirits, Lonia Land, with the nickname of a sacrificial fortress. Lonia Land earned this nickname because victims who would appease the anger of the dead gathered there. The castle wall surrounding the land served to block the wave of death, and they had to endure for a month against zombies to see the spring after the wave of death. A moment later, he asked Harmond if all those prisoner soldiers were going to fight on the front line while observing the people walking in chains. Harmond replied in the affirmative, adding that he could help treat the injured and assist with funerals. He said he thought he could do it but was stunned when Harmond informed him that there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 casualties every year. He asked Harmond if there was anyone else who would help him, and Harmond replied that there were about 80 priests capable of performing the purification ritual, and the soldiers would assist with the funerals, so he shouldn't worry. However, sometimes there were men who died of exhaustion from overworking. But it would be alright. He turned on his side and called Gennard. Then he shouted that he wanted some drinks. Gennard was confused, but he continued to shout that he couldn't handle the situation without a drink, and he would rather die from drinking too much than from working too hard. He ordered Charlotte to go with Grill and have some fun too, to which Charlotte immediately replied, okay. He took the wine bottle and told Grill and Charlotte to come back before the wave of death started, to which both of them agreed. He reminded them that they had to protect him and slammed his door shut, leaving Charlotte to tell him in her mind to just believe in her. Harmond was disappointed that people called Alan matured. On the other hand, inside his room, he was relieved that he had made a good act and knew that he was not going to drink the wine. Then he began to purify the wine, and the wine slowly changed into water until it became completely clean. He thought he should save some holy water to get through things. He knew it was better to fill all the bottles with holy water and consider it as his energy drink, as pouring energy into water would also help him train to control his power. While he was busy purifying the bottle of wine, he noticed something. He put down the bottle on the table and looked at the gun hanging on the wall. He had read in a book that there were guns in that world, but he didn't know they were that common. He knew that since no one particularly used guns in that world, it was because guns were just for show. To be exact, they used mana instead of gunpowder, and people could use them by pouring mana or holy power into them. However, they consumed an enormous amount of mana, so trained wizards could only shoot 5 times, and it took 5 minutes to manifest a bullet with mana. It was no surprise that they had become antique items. He remembered that in movies, they killed zombies with one headshot and wondered if that was how he could create a bullet. He imagined aiming at a zombie and then releasing a bullet. The mana bullet flew through the room with force, and the system showed him that he had successfully manifested a bullet with holy power. However, when the smoke cleared, he saw that the wall of his room had a huge hole, and the system showed him that it had activated divine energy, making him realize that he was in trouble. On the other hand, Harmon was clearly upset, and one of the guard knights behind him quietly remarked to the other guard that their vice commander didn't seem to be in a good mood. The other knight responded that Harmon must be feeling sensitive because of the upcoming wave of death, but he thought it might also have to do with the 7th prince. Suddenly, Harmon called the guard soldiers over and angrily asked them if he really had to remind them to keep their eyes on the prisoners instead of chatting. The knights quickly and nervously replied with a no and promptly walked away, leaving Harmon alone. However, he knew that his knights weren't entirely wrong about the 7th prince. He had heard a loud noise the previous day, but Alan had told them not to peek inside the room of a sensitive teenager and accused them of invading his privacy. He was sure that Alan had broken something without realizing he had left a huge hole behind him. He believed that an asshole is indeed an asshole, but he remembered Parlock telling him that Alan had changed a lot after the suicide incident, as if he had lost his memory. Parlock had sincerely told him that Alan had carried out his duties at the grave, even stepping up to fight against a group of zombies. Most importantly, Alan had saved them. He thought that the villagers were saying nonsensical things and that Alan must have somehow blackmailed them. Then he wondered how an asshole like Alan could subdue a necromancer on the level of Morgana. He speculated that the man named Grill must be exceptionally strong, which only added to the confusion of the situation. He considered writing a recommendation letter for Grill to take the exam to become a holy knight. However, his thoughts were interrupted by someone shouting in pain. He was surprised and wondered if the prisoners were fighting again. He immediately ran to where the noise was coming from, shouting and asking what they were doing right before the big battle. However, he was left speechless and in shock when he saw someone pointing a shovel at the man's neck, and Alan angrily asked the man if he didn't know who he was. The day after arriving at the Lonia estate, people began to succumb to the epidemic and overwork, which made him realize why they had taken such good care of him, to make him work tirelessly while wearing a bird's beak mask for purification to prevent infection. He wondered if the time hadn't come yet because the zombies didn't seem to be approaching. But someone called out to him. He lifted his head to see who it was, and a man clarified that he was addressing him. It was Heis Hedron, the eldest son of Count Hedron, who teasingly asked why he wasn't coming over to rest. Heis then commented that from his appearance, it seemed like he might be a student from the academy. But Alan simply asked Heis which academy he was referring to, which surprised Heis. He asked if Alan hadn't come to serve as part of his disciplinary action. The men with Heis remarked to each other that children from privileged families could easily obtain exemptions from such duties and that it was apparent that Alan was just a country bumpkin from the outskirts, which infuriated Alan. The men advised Alan that if he wanted to lead a peaceful life there, he should listen to Heis because Heis was the eldest son of Count Hedron. Heis mentioned that if he hadn't been looking for a maid, he wouldn't have bothered to come all the way there. He then pointed at Charlotte and suggested she would suffice. Heis inquired if she was Alan's maid and rudely commented that he had acquired a girl as attractive as Charlotte at the academy, implying that he would take care of her. However, Charlotte fled in fear and ultimately forced Heis to raise his hands, leading Alan to conclude that Heis was a repugnant individual. Deciding that he would rather dig the ground than associate with such people, Alan turned to leave. However, he halted in his tracks when he heard Heis call out to Charlotte. She asked Heis if he was addressing her, and Heis confirmed that he was. He then ordered Charlotte to come closer to him and grabbed her hand, startling her. Heis told her that she should join them to play in place of her busy master. Charlotte replied with a firm no because Alan had a lot on his plate. Heis arrogantly questioned if she didn't grasp the situation and asserted that playing with commoners like her was a dream come true. Heis yelped in pain when Charlotte squeezed his hand, and the men rushed to his aid. Alan observed in amazement as Charlotte continued to hold Heis's hand, almost appearing as though she might break his arm. Heis shouted at Charlotte that she was a monstrous individual and asked if commoners like her possessed nothing but strength, given they had lived in a remote area. Alan decided it was time to intervene and told Heis that it was enough, but Heis continued to hurl insults at Charlotte, speculating about her parents and the supposed monstrous blood she had inherited. Also, considering half of the dead people in the land of the dead become zombies, and her family will soon all become zombies, making Alan angry. He lifts the shovel and then powerfully stabs the shovel closer to Heis, breaking the ground in the process. Heis shakily asks him what he did, and he replies that he made a mistake while trying to dig a grave. Heis still angrily asks him how he could call it a mistake. But before Heis can finish his word, he punches him, saying that his hand slipped this time. Heis is slammed to the ground and fearfully tells him that he already knew who he was, but he still dared to touch him. He just steps on Heis and asks him if he knows who he is. Suddenly, someone shouts for him to stop, and Harmon asks him if he's going to cause another accident. He pushes him away from Heis. Heis tells Harmon that Alan hit him, so he should punish Alan immediately. When Charlotte tries to explain everything, Heis angrily tells Harmon that he is Heis, the eldest son of Count Hedron. Harmon tells him that he can't just ignore it, but Alan raises his finger and tells them to be silent. Harmon wonders what's happening because his voice isn't coming out, and if it's an incantation using holy power. He then calls Harmon and orders him to tell that Puck Heiss who he is. A few minutes pass in silence, and Harmon introduces him to Heiss as Alan Alphals, the grandson of the Holy Emperor and the 7th Prince. He asks Heiss if he understands now whose maid he was rude to and to whom he failed to show respect. Heiss, still shaking, tries to say something on the matter, but he cuts him off, saying there's no need to be scared, and that if he sincerely apologizes, there won't be any big problems. However, a minute later, he is behind bars, and he asks Charlotte if there's a problem. She replies that according to Harmon, the injury inflicted on the nobleman's son cannot be forgiven. Heiss faints and is carried away right after that. She apologizes to him for getting a week's probation because of her, and he tells her that everything happened because of that rude Heiss. She shouldn't worry because he can kill time by reading a book. Then he looks out the window behind him and tells her that it's better that way because there's a blizzard outside. Meanwhile, outside, one of the knights calls Harmon to report that they've ordered the prisoners to clear the snow. However, it's snowing so much that it isn't being cleared fast enough. Harmon is busy wondering if Alan is even aware that he used an incantation. Even though Alan is a good-for-nothing, he wonders if the blood of the Holy Emperor still runs thick in Alan's veins. The knight once again calls him, making him snap back to reality, and he tells the knight that they have to keep removing the snow for the castle wall to remain at an optimal height. Then he looks down again and notices that it has gotten very cold. But there are so few zombies. The knight reports to him that their majesty, the Holy Emperor, killed the dead Spirit King on December 25th and asks him if they should report that to the Holy Emperor's family. He replies that it would be best and orders the knight to gather the prisoners because they need to take some time to regroup. Then the prisoners begin to head back inside the palace without noticing a bloody boot on the snowy ground next to their footprints and a huge zombie busy eating the owner of the boot. Then someone shouted to close the gate and ordered the priest to quickly treat the prisoners. One of the prisoners told the priest that zombies attacked them from behind, and due to the blizzard, they didn't realize the zombies were hiding. They cried out, saying those in the back were all eaten by the zombies. Meanwhile, Harmon ordered everyone to regroup, get into position, climb up the outer wall quickly, and prepare for a defense battle. He wondered why it was so quiet. He knew the day the dead Spirit King Ammon was killed was approaching, so it was expected that zombies would come out. There would soon be 2 or more than 3,000 undead gathered there. However, he couldn't believe that the zombies attacked from behind. He wondered if it was possible that the zombies were hiding under the snow, suppressing their instincts. He knew that undead are dead people who know no fear and rely only on their instincts. Zombies weren't properly equipped and didn't know any strategies or tactics, so they usually managed to handle them in great numbers every year. However, he looked at the zombies approaching their palace in a coordinated manner, making him wonder if they had turned into a perfectly coordinated army. He knew this had never happened before, so he wondered what was going on. Then someone called them the Living Ones and told them to be afraid, envious, and long for death. They were scared because he was the judge of that world and the Messiah who would save the world through death. Then the demon introduced himself as the successor to Udai, the god of death. The system showed that he was a vampire count with the ability to bite, discharge mana, perform necromancy, and show arrogance. In the cell, Alan closed his book, noticing the noise outside and the delay in bringing his meal. He wondered what was happening. He looked out the window and wondered why they would let a prince go hungry. Suddenly, someone shouted for him, and he told Gennard that he wasn't trying to break out of jail. Gennard begged him to come out immediately. Alan put on his coat and reminded Gennard that he was still on probation. Gennard, who was getting the key, told him that wasn't the problem right now because there was a legion of undead outside. Alan asked if it was because they didn't have enough workers, but Gennard replied that it wasn't the case. A vampire had brought a legion of undead. Alan asked if he was seeing it correctly and wondered why such a high-level monster was there. Gennard said it was clearly using human language and controlling other monsters, so it was definitely a vampire. Gennard opened the cell gate and told Alan that he didn't know what had happened. But for now, Harmon was confronting them. Since the place might fall, he suggested that Alan should evacuate to a safe place. Then, Gennard told him that he would accompany him. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise and the ceiling slowly collapsed, prompting him to ask Gennard about the noise. Gennard replied that it must be the legion of monsters, and they needed to quickly evacuate through the back gate. However, then he heard something above them, and a swarm of zombies jumped out, breaking the wall behind him, which left him surprised. When he looked back, he was shocked to see a pile of zombies. Gennard shouted that it was crazy, as the vampire count had released a bunch of zombies and thrown them at them. Also, Gennard shouted that the undead had infiltrated their territory. He knew that if they were under attack like this, the outside must be swarming with zombies. He immediately closed the cell door while telling Gennard to come to his senses and command his soldiers. Because if the residents of the territory were being hunted like this, more undead would follow. Gennard quickly ran away and told him that he would find a safe place for the territory's residents, leaving him frustrated and wondering what to do. He realized that he had managed everything so far because they were at a manageable level, but this time, he was completely outnumbered. In a situation like this, he knew he had no choice but to run. So, he used his holy water power to attack the zombies, making them cry out in pain. After all the zombies were down on the ground, he hurriedly walked past them, knowing he needed to take the opportunity and go outside quickly. But when he emerged from the underground, he was shocked to see and hear people begging for help while a horde of zombies attacked them one by one. One of the men shouted that there was nowhere to run, but the knight urged them to fall back immediately and use their shields to push the zombies away. Another man shouted that zombies were approaching from behind as well. All Alan could see was the knight being attacked by the zombies too, which made him clench his teeth in anger. He thought that he didn't know how long he could hold out with the holy water he had made so far. He raised his shovel in the air, shouting that nothing was going right, and then slammed it on the ground. He believed that the goddess Gaia was irritated because she couldn't control him. The system then indicated that he was initiating a wide area blessing. The shovel released a significant amount of holy water, swirling in the air like a tsunami, raining down on all of them. He knew that he had used the skill debilitating epidemic. The holy water fell on everyone and hit the zombies, causing them to cry out in pain. One of the knights wondered why the zombies were melting in the rain, and one of the civilians told the knight to look at their wounds because they were healing as well. This made them wonder if it was holy water, not rain, and if the holy water was falling from the sky. They thought it must be a blessing from the goddess Gaia. Then one of the men told everyone that it was the prince, pointing to Alan, and said that the holy water surrounded the prince. Alan was exhausted, and the civilians couldn't believe that he could use holy power like that. But they expected it because even though Alan was an exiled prince, he was the grandson of the hero who had stopped the dead spirit King Ammon 50 years ago, known as the Holy Emperor Celtic Atfalls. The knight asked if there were any residents who needed help and told them that Gennard had opened the basement of the mansion. They should follow him because he would guide them there. A mother smiled at her child and ran toward the mansion, shouting that they were alive and had made it. She thanked Alan so much, and Alan, exhausted, replied, sure, thinking that even though he had only made it rain inside the castle, he was so tired. He called the soldiers who were still doing fine and told them that they were coming with him to help the holy knight outside. The soldiers panicked and told him they didn't have suitable weapons. He explained that the undead couldn't be defeated by the weapons of ordinary people like them, which was why he had given them a blessing. It was also his first time, so he didn't know how long it would last. He told them that their weapons now had a holy power boost. A soldier asked him what a boost was, and he replied that it meant their weapons would work effectively. He asked the soldiers if they shouldn't have to repay him for saving their lives and told them that they needed to go because they had to fight to survive. They opened the gate of the palace and saw soldiers fighting against the zombies. One of the zombies jumped toward the gate, but the soldier managed to cut the zombie's head in time, slashing it in half. The soldiers were amazed by their blessed weapons because they knew they had barely touched the zombie with their weapons, yet it had died. They realized that there was really holy power in their weapons, so they thought those zombies were nothing and shouted that they would help too. The soldiers thought that at this rate, they could win, and they were sure they could win because the descendant of the hero was with them. However, suddenly, they heard the sound of horse hooves and were shocked to see a flaming undead riding an undead flaming horse, aiming its spear at them. It released the spear toward one of the soldiers, cutting down the zombies and other soldiers in its way. The soldier was stunned in shock, sits on the ground in fear, and looked at the flaming horse in front of him. The soldier who had been targeted by the sharp spear shakily told everyone that they couldn't defeat that monster. But then someone pulled out a gun and Alan aimed it at the monster. He apologized to the soldier, explaining that it was only his second time using it, so he wasn't very familiar with it yet. Then he fired his magic bullet. On the other hand, the vampire could sense the energy of the living and was enticed by the prospect of fresh meat he hadn't tasted in 50 years. He wondered how fresh it would be and how powerful their legion would become if he turned them into undead. The vampire reflected on his evolution, from an instinct-driven zombie to a ghoul, from a ghoul to a Dullahan, from a Dullahan to a zombie lord, and finally to a vampire. He pondered how long he had waited to develop the ability to think and make judgments. Vampires were ranked based on the mana they possessed. Although he wasn't yet acknowledged by the other vampires, having recently become one, he was confident because he had received the power of a vampire count, which he obtained by looking at the mask on his hand known as the skull of the dead spirit king, Ammon. The vampire was grateful to the skull, as it had allowed him to amass the necessary mana in just a few decades, which would have otherwise taken at least 100 years. He called his 20,000-strong legion to witness, as he believed he would soon surpass the level of a count and ascend to the status of a king. The vampire was no longer afraid of regular holy power and arrogantly demanded that the holy knights surrender quickly and become his undead. Meanwhile, in the palace, a massive weapon was unleashed. Harmon urged the knights not to stop firing the ballista and told everyone to hold their ground and not let the enemy advance. As the sun set, the undead grew stronger, so they had to eliminate at least one more of their foes. Harmon also acknowledged the risk of the village collapsing if they failed, as the zombies had already infiltrated their territory several times. He felt frustrated that he couldn't relinquish command due to their dire situation, wondering about the fate of the village and what might happen next. He believed that if only their majesty, the Holy Emperor, were there, everything would be fine. But then he heard something fall behind him, making him jump. Charlotte assured him that the village was safe because Alan was there, and she vowed to protect the village where Alan was currently staying. He was stunned hearing Charlotte's words and replied in agreement while she dropped a large number of swords on the ground. She informed him that she heard he wanted the weapons moved from below to the top of the castle walls. He was preoccupied with the thought that he had initially considered her just a maid, and he was amazed by her strength. He asked her how he could consider himself weak when even a child like her was working so hard. He was convinced they could endure, knowing that in the worst scenario, he needed to break through that place and cut off the vampire's head. On the other hand, the zombie lord assembled a swarm of zombies on a large platform, and they were surprised to see this mass of zombies flying toward the castle walls. Harmon immediately moved to the front and told Charlotte it was dangerous, urging her to get behind him. Harmon invoked the god of war and beseeched him to grant him the strength to protect Charlotte. Suddenly, Charlotte jumped forward in front of him, holding a sword, and slashes the massive zombies, cutting them in half and diverting the group to either side without harming Harmon. Harmon was in shock and asked her how she had done it. He noticed that she had not only split the massive zombies, but the zombies cut by Charlotte's sword were unable to stand up. He knew that only by targeting the heads or imbuing their weapons with holy power could they stop the undead. He was puzzled by the remarkable effectiveness of Charlotte's sword. On the other hand, Charlotte was busy beheading zombies and dispatching those in her path. Harmon noticed that Charlotte's techniques were rudimentary and unpolished, and she was relying on her physical strength to compensate for her lack of familiarity with swordsmanship. However, the sheer destructive power, the raw cutting ability, was unmistakably the Holy Empire's imperial swordsmanship, passed down to the Holy Cross squad. Harmon called out to her from above and asked where she had learned that swordsmanship and if she had any connection to the Holy Emperor's family. She replied that she was not from the Holy Emperor's family but was merely Alan, the 7th prince's servant, and had learned her swordsmanship from a book. They fell into a brief silence, but in truth, Harmon couldn't hear a single word Charlotte had said. Meanwhile, in the mansion, the knight set down a substantial quantity of holy water and told the priest that when their holy power was depleted, they should use the holy water to heal the wounded. Gennard asked the knight where the bottles of holy water had come from, and the knight explained that Alan had provided them. Before coming to the estate, Alan had mentioned that he had brought plenty of holy water, just in case. Gennard felt relief and inquired about Alan's whereabouts. The knight responded that after returning from the battle outside, Alan had taken the remaining soldiers with him to help with the castle walls. This news left Gennard shocked as he asked if Alan had gone to battle and then left again. The knight told Gennard that he thought he had already given permission to Alan to go. Gennard fell silent for a moment and then explained that while everyone praised Alan's personality and holy power, he didn't distrust Alan. However, he was concerned about whether there would be any troops left within the territory. Inside the territory, weapons and blood were scattered all over the ground, and the soldiers were marching in formation. Unbeknownst to them, zombies were hiding beneath the soldiers' clothing. On the top of the castle, a soldier asked Alan who he was, and Alan replied that they were reinforcements. The soldier found it hard to believe that there were still people left behind but emphasized the urgency at the castle gate. Alan explained that they had dispatched half of their forces to the castle walls, understanding that there was more work to be done there. They wouldn't have time to check each other's faces, and since Alan was distributing holy water, he didn't have enough for the new skill. Instead, he used the Spectre soldier's skill to raise the old undead soldiers. It was a challenging task, so he used the corpses from the village to assist. He knew that it would be all over once they were discovered, so he decided to cover their faces. The soldier asked if Alan was there to provide medical treatment and suggested he should have stayed in the rear instead of coming all the way there. Alan explained that he had other matters to attend to on his way and pointed to the gun, expressing his desire to try using it. The soldier was surprised and commented that a gun was